Communist China continues to crack down on dissidents and religious leaders in Hong Kong and in the mainland. Now, the Chinese military this week made a show of force with live fire exercises demonstrating its military might. What is China trying to achieve, and what will U.S.-China relations look like under this new administration? Here with an update and analysis is president of the Population Research Institute and author of The Bully of Asia, Stephen Mosher. Steve, I want to start with the report at the end of December. It detailed the arrest of 2 nuns last year at the unofficial Vatican mission in Hong Kong. Now, the arrests occurred in May, but they went unreported until December 30th. How significant are these arrests, and why is Beijing targeting nuns and clergy, particularly in Hong Kong?
Well, Raymond, Hong Kong has been a center of political dissent against Chinese Communist Party rule for a long time. And what people need to understand is that even though Catholics are only about 8% of the population of Hong Kong, 7.5 million, they are the most politically active part of the Hong Kong population because they believe in absolute truth. They believe in justice. They believe in our Lord, who is the truth himself. And because of that, they stand up and allow themselves to be counted. They've been the leaders in the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. They've been the leaders demanding that the Chinese Communist Party respect the agreement that it signed with Great Britain way back in the 1980s, allowing Hong Kong its freedoms for the next 30 years. So they're sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to the democratic movement in Hong Kong. And so the Communist Party, which has always had an animosity towards Catholics above all, is seeking to crush that sort of dissent.
Is this an effort of the communist government to shut down that mission, that Holy See mission for good? I know it's considered unofficial. Why is it unofficial?
Well, it's unofficial because the Vatican does not have formal diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. Remember, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, until Jimmy Carter normalized relations with China, we had our consul general in Hong Kong was the means by which we kept tabs on what was happening on the mainland. So Hong Kong is about as close as the Vatican can get to Beijing in the absence of an official mission. And I'll tell you what, the Vatican has relations with Taiwan, but its senior diplomat is not stationed in Taiwan, it's stationed in Hong Kong. So that tells you where the Vatican's oriented towards.
I want to talk a little about that infamous Vatican-China agreement. It figures into Beijing's intensified efforts against the church, particularly in Hong Kong. Since the details of that agreement are still secret for the most part, how does Hong Kong figure into that agreement, do you think? I mean, according to Vatican officials, Hong Kong was not supposed to be part of that deal, correct?
That's right, because when it was signed, the hammer had not yet come down on Hong Kong. Now it has, and Hong Kong is regarded now by Beijing as part and parcel of China, no different than Shanghai, no different than Beijing. They want to maintain the pretense that it still has the rule of law because it's a financial center. It's got $450 billion in reserves that Beijing wants to get their hands on. But for all practical purposes, Hong Kong has simply been integrated into China. And the church in Hong Kong will henceforth be treated the same way the church in China is treated, which is to say, very badly. Persecution is coming, even for those people in Hong Kong who are trying to keep their heads down. There's no escaping the pressure from the CCP.
Steve, help us understand why the Vatican considers that agreement a success, which we can assume from their willingness to renew it. I mean, meanwhile, at the same time, we see arrests of clergy, faithful, the church hierarchy even cracking down on their own priests to keep them from getting too political and running afoul of the communist government. In fact, in a recent interview with Reuters, Cardinal Joseph Zen said this: "We are at the bottom of the pit. There's no freedom of expression anymore. All these things are normal in mainland China. We are becoming like any other city in China," just what you said. "For any word you say, the authorities can say you're offending the national security law." Your take on that?
Well, the national security law is written so broadly that it basically means that anybody who says or does anything the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like can be arrested, can be sentenced to prison, can indeed be executed under the terms of the law. They have now Jack Ma, one of the wealthiest people in China, worth about $50 billion, the founder of Alibaba, has now
Yep.
disappeared. Why? Because he criticized the Chinese Communist Party's overregulation of the financial sector. You can't do that. You can make as much money as you want in China, but as soon as you cross swords with the Chinese Communist Party, you realize they have all the swords and you're empty-handed.
Wow. I want to get your take on what might this new relationship between China and the United States look like once President-elect Joe Biden takes over on January 20th. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs says China-U.S. relations have come to a new crossroads and a new window of hope is opening. We hope the U.S. side will work with the Chinese side to focus on cooperation and manage differences and bring bilateral relations back to the normal track at an early date. Steve, how do you see this new relationship going for China and the U.S.?
Well, China hopes that a Biden administration will simply revert to the Obama-Biden policies of 10 years ago or 5 years ago, when basically we conceded to the Chinese Communist Party the idea that they were eventually going to become the dominant power in the world, that we were on, according to the Obama-Biden administration, on a kind of glide path to second-rate status, and that we should make concessions one after another to China. That the fact is that going back to the days of the Soviet Union, we have long realized that our doves encourage their hawks, and our hawks encourage their doves, so that when we have a strong policy towards China, they display weakness, that our strong policy encourages their doves to take over. When we have a weak policy, as I'm afraid we're looking at now, because basically the Biden administration looks like a rehash of the Obama-Biden administration in terms of personnel. Our doves in Washington, who are going to make concession after concession, are going to be encouraging their hawks. I think that's why we're seeing China become more aggressive all over the world stage. Vis-a-vis Taiwan, vis-a-vis the South China Sea, vis-a-vis Japan. And in terms of cooperation, at the top of the list for the Chinese Communist Party is cooperating with the United States on the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's get this straight. They release a virus from their lab, which is now becoming clear. It goes around the world. It causes economic devastation, tremendous loss of life. And we're supposed to cooperate with them in cleaning up the mess caused by a virus that they released upon the world.
It's quite a number. They did quite a number on the world. You're right. And I agree with you. I think we're going to have to monitor this administration closely, particularly given the allegations of financial payments between members of the Biden family and the Chinese. Chinese companies also, Steve, have been reportedly buying a lot of land here in the United States. What is their goal? Is this even legal?
Well, it's certainly legal for private parties, even though they're, citizens of another country, to buy land and make investments in the United States. But China should be a special case because the Chinese Communist Party is a threat to the American way of life. It's a threat to freedom and democracy everywhere, not just in the United States. And some of these land purchases have been very, very strategic. They now have purchased right next to the major Air Force training center down in South Texas, where Air Force pilots learn to fly jets. They purchased 100,000 acres and are supposedly setting up a farm, a wind farm there with windmills. But of course, anything owned by a Chinese company, which every Chinese company is required to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party on intelligence matters, that will be an intelligence collection gathering station that will gather information on how the U.S. trains its pilots. I think that sort of information would be very useful to China in the event of conflict.
Unbelievable. Along with persecutions and restrictions of the Catholic Church in China, according to a new report in BuzzFeed, satellite imagery, interviews, and government documents have revealed at least 100 huge mass detention facilities, similar to the Uyghur camps we've been talking about for many years now. How widespread is this problem of forced labor in China, Steve? And is it just Muslims detained, or are other minorities involved as well?
Well, it's really all minorities because right now we have this huge Sinicization effort, this homogenization effort, where everybody is supposed to be homogenized into the standard Han Chinese mold. They're supposed to be able to speak Mandarin. They're supposed to follow Chinese customs and not the customs of Tibet or the Mongolian customs or the Uyghur customs. And really, it's an effort to extinguish, I believe, in a generation, an entire people. Perhaps not physically, although that's part of it, but certainly it's a kind of cultural genocide. And when, in the case of Uyghurs, when you lock up the men in camps, when you station policemen with the women, when you put the children in boarding schools, and when you only teach them in Mandarin Chinese and don't teach them their own language and culture, that's a recipe for a fairly quick extinguishing of a people that has really been separate culturally since time immemorial.
You know, Steve, we saw the stock market soar this week after the certification of the Biden presidency, or on the eve of it. Your thoughts on how that might be related to this renewed relationship with China, a relaxation in tensions, and perhaps that cheap labor in China that the Trump administration sought to stop American companies from exploiting and using and abetting?
Well, China's best friends in the United States right now are based in Wall Street. And Wall Street is very happy with any kind of rapprochement with China because once again, they think they'll be able to list Chinese stocks on American stock exchanges, raise money from Americans from their retirement funds and so forth, funds that will go to China to strengthen a regime which is not only persecuting the church in China, which we've talked about, but of course it's building up its military to threaten its neighbors and us. But Wall Street makes a lot in terms of fees on such offerings. So it's very happy to have better relations with China. The other thing I think that Wall Street's anticipating here is a big stimulus package from the Democrat-controlled Congress. That money is coming down. It probably will lead to some inflation in the future, but right now numbers are going up.
Steve Mosher, thank you for your insights. As always, Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order by Stephen Mosher is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you for being here, Steve.
Thank you, Raymond.